Driving change in maritime. Welcome to another episode of Teqplay Vodcast series. Joining me today is Frederik Schulte, Associate Professor of Maritime and Transport Technology, and Patrick Everts from KOTUG, General Manager Maritime Excellence Center. Today we will be talking about Port Call for Net Zero, a joint research initiative. Stay tuned to our talk. Welcome, Frederik.
Thank you very much, Leon. Great to be here.
Maybe it's good if you do a short introduction of yourself and...
Yes, sure. So I'm Frederik Schulte. I'm an associate professor in Delft, at Delft University of Technology, as we say in English, or TU Delft, as we often say in Dutch. And I have a group of PhD students, postdocs, working with me on AI in terms of machine learning and optimization techniques for sustainable logistics, particularly focusing on ports as well. And I'm also the PI, as we say, the principal investigator or the lead for the Port Call Zero project that we're going to discuss today.
Good to have you on board. And Patrick, maybe you can also do a short introduction from your side.
Thanks, Leon. Yeah, I'll keep it short. Yeah, for the last 10 years working for KOTUG. KOTUG is a global maritime service provider operating in ports all over the world. And basically, 7 years ago, KOTUG established a company called OptiPort. And most recently, I also took full-time the MD role of OptiPort. And OptiPort is a TUG/port scheduling application. So we schedule assets in ports.
Yeah, great. Maybe it's good to start a bit with the project that we're working on. It's a joint industry initiative. Maybe, Frederik, you can share a bit about what the initiative is all about, the Port Call Zero.
Yeah, of course. I think it might be interesting for a general audience to understand what an NWO perspective project is. Mm-hmm. So that's a bigger funding scheme of the Dutch funding agency, NWO, which is open to everybody. So it could be medical researchers, it could be biologists, and it could be us working on ports. There were 50 proposals in the last year's round, and we ranked second. And I think this also highlights the importance that the funding agency sees on the port call issue. We are a joint initiative, as you already said, with 16 industry partners that are fundamentally important. You are representing Teqplay as one of them. Patrick is representing KOTUG as another one. There's Port of Rotterdam, there's Maersk, there's Hapag-Lloyd, there's Van Oort, APMT, a lot of the important players in the port call process also on board with us, but there's a lot of expertise on the academic side who really know AI and don't just know prompting, so they can also bring this knowledge into the developments of the project. And we're just to get started. I got the official letter from NWO last week. So we're now hiring PhD students. We have 8 positions and people partly working at companies, partly working at the universities, such that we have close collaboration and really can make some impact over the next 5 years with this project.
Yeah. Patrick, maybe it's good for you to say, why did KOTUG choose to step into such a research initiative? What does it bring to a company like KOTUG?
Yeah, no, indeed, Leon, that's a very good question. So as I said, we have developed this application called OptiPort, and already for a few years we are working together with TU Delft, in various research studies to see how we can further optimize mainly the AI component within OptiPort. And then this project came along, and we actually saw a good benefit because. What we do now is really TUG scheduling, but TUG scheduling is just one part of the port call process. And what we are aiming to is that we upgrade the TUG scheduling application into a full port call scheduling application with all the complexity that comes with it. And that requires research, that requires manpower. And that was the main reason why we said, hey, this is a good initiative for KOTUG and for OptiPort to participate in, because we think this can really drive both our products, but also the understanding of port call optimization and how AI can play a vital role in that. So that was the main reason why we participated in this project.
Yeah. I really can relate to what you're saying. I think for Teqplay as well. I really believe very strongly in having a collaboration between the education, research, and the industry. I think that is really important to bring those different voices together to get an understanding of what is the problem that is really happening in practice. How actually can you, with fundamental research, add insights to that problem, and also involve students, because I think it's also about attracting talent and finding the right people for this great industry, the maritime industry. I think that is really something that is invaluable, and I think working with the TU Delft, working on the edge of AI, really bringing technology to problems, working from a deep understanding of what is the problem. That is something which was vastly attractive to Teqplay, to say like, okay, if we have a voice and we can actually voice what we have learned within the industry, the dynamics that are happening in a port call, the complexity of how people are working, the change that is required, all the drivers that we have collected. That would be a nice contribution. And again, also, like you say, Patrick, being able to work with the right talent, I think that is something which is attractive for us as well.
Yeah.
But you want
maybe to add to that, Leon, I think. Yeah, maybe to add to that, it's indeed the TU Delft, but also, of course, the other universities close to Delft that are participating. And this is the port call project in the Netherlands in the coming years. So that's one of that. You have to be part of that if you are active in port call optimization.
And one party to mention.
There's Erasmus University and the Leiden University are also part
Smartport, of course, who are very experienced at facilitating this kind of collaboration and also co-leading this project.
Yeah, I think that is something which is very strong also about the Rotterdam region, that we do have these type of collaborations happening. Still do have a background in the university as well on that one. But maybe we've now set kind of the scene about how does the collaboration look, what kind of parties are involved. So that ports, it are the service providers, it are technology providers who are participating in it. But maybe it's good to elaborate a bit more on what are we going to research? What is going to happen? Maybe you can enlighten the audience on that one, Frederik.
Sure. The core idea of this project is to look at decarbonization of the port call process, because we believe, and that's also how we explained the project to the funding agency, to say we need to look at ports to decarbonize the maritime sector. And of course, the challenge is not new. So you can save a lot of emissions when you reduce waiting times of vessels in the call process. But there's also the push towards renewable energies, towards electricity at shore power, and also alternative fuels, which further complicate the process. So the project has really that ambition to focus on just in time, but also introducing the renewable energies and making sure that the port call process still works efficiently, because that's very important in the end. And we take a slightly different approach than maybe in the past, where methods like machine learning wouldn't be available to that extent, and also the necessary data wasn't available yet.
Good. I think for me, what is really standing out is also the fact that you start also from the operational perspective and say like, okay, it is not a theoretical model that we are looking at. It's a model that is being used in practice, taking into account the dynamics of operations. Because I think in a lab environment, it's easy to get value out of it or to prove something. But with the over 10, 13 years that I've been active now in the maritime industry, I've learned like, well, if something can break, it will break. If something can go different, it will go different. So there's a lot of dynamics happening in that part. How does that blend into the project, Frederik?
It's at the core, right? So what we observed when we started writing this proposal is that people start looking into demonstrators, technological demonstrators like shore power technology. And then if they want to go into operation with that, they realize that now we have things like berth allocation conflicts, and there are significant impacts on the operation. So in this project, we wanted to look into the operational perspective right from the start and see if we introduce new technologies, cleaner technologies, how can we make sure that we still stay efficient and have, in the end, the KPIs, the operational KPIs that we need to stay competitive.
And Patrick, from your end, if you hear this, you get excited. Is this what you are looking for in OptiPort and KOTUG?
No, absolutely. I think it is a very complicated process, and I think what you see in the industry right now is that there is a lot of focus on route optimization, so vessel optimization, but that all stops at the pilot station, or most often the pilot station. And then the real complex bits start. And so it is very complex. You have so many different parties involved. And it also very much depends on the type of port that you are operating in. Of course, right now the focus is Rotterdam area, but there's so many different port structures in the world. And we had a couple of students from TU Delft also looking into that. And all these different port structures, they all have a different way of steering the different service providers in the port, or sharing data, or sharing information, and that's making this whole topic such a complicated topic. And that's why I think also the decision was made to really turn this into as Frederik mentioned, a 5-year research study, because it is just not an easy solution to fix, or easy problem to fix. And that's cool. And I think now with all the software capabilities that are developing so rapidly, this is definitely a nut we should be able to crack. As with all the people that we have and all the parties, organizations that we have in this consortium.
I think that's also one of the points that I've got a background, and I've been very active also in the field of self-organization, and I really. Think if you look at a port call, and if you look at a port, having something which is centrally governing an entire port call is extremely difficult, because there are so many stakeholders, there are so many different stakes at the table, and things might change continuously overall, so it's very hard to elaborate. But yep. I think if you really look into technology that is providing information in the personal context, in the decision that you need to make, that will help already for someone to make a better decision, and eventually also move towards a more optimal solution in general. I think also that is one of the topics that we're going to work on in the proposal. Maybe. Yes.
So Patrick described it, you described it to some extent. So there's the issue of information sharing. So we know about the potential of just-in-time for a long time. And sometimes people say, hey, this is not new, but the approach is new. So instead of relying on information sharing, instead of enforcing a centralized approach where this might be difficult because you have this landlord structure that is a lot more decentralized, like in Rotterdam, we have a different approach in the sense that we say we use federated decision-making, where we don't need to share all the data, but we can use machine learning to use limited amounts of data and then get insights and facilitate collaboration, coordination as a result of these learning approaches that we deploy. And then also focus on incentives for every individual to make sure that they gain from this collaboration and they're not forced to do it centralized. I think this has some potential to create collaboration in comparison to centralized approaches that might work at certain ports. Patrick also mentioned that some ports are centralized so that you can control everything, but in many ports like Rotterdam, where you're not in this position, it can be very effective to create incentives for every individual and limit the need for information sharing with the alternatives that we have on the data side and on the machine learning side.
Yeah. Clear. I think I had a conversation with Hamburg, HVCC. They are over there. The issue trust was brought to the table. Actually, yeah. A lot of parties have brought say like, we trust you to make the decision on collaboration and coordination. If we take that topic, if we look from the AI perspective, I think we're looking also in technology. How can technology help in doing that? What is your take on that? How will technology, do you have examples of that, on how technology is solving that problem or contributing to that problem?
I'm sure Patrick can describe it, but we also, recently I've been talking to the pilots and they say, one problem that we have is we don't know when the orders are going to come. And we have a lot of data. We could use that data to build learning models that anticipate that for us in the future, but so far it didn't work. And we don't have the information sharing in place that would give us the information when to get started with our operations ahead of time. So that's missing at the moment for the tugboats. I believe Patrick can describe that very similarly. And it even exists between the liner shipping companies and the terminals, though they might have close collaboration, that they're not always prepared for the vessels when they are coming. So there we can jump in, we can use the data that is available, we can build these prediction models and provide better information so people can coordinate the processes when that is needed and get started on time and come closer to a just-in-time clockwork process for the port call overall.
Yeah.
No, I fully agree. Yeah. So, what if I may, Leon, or you want to ask a question?
Yeah. No. Please, Patrick. Yeah.
No, because you have essentially you want to match supply and demand, right? So there's a demand for a certain service and there is a supply of a certain service, but the capacities of all the different service providers don't match. And that is, you need indeed to have this transparent way of making decisions. Okay, why do we now choose to let this vessel come in at this time and not half an hour earlier or whatever? So if these decision rules are clear and everybody understands that and it's transparent why certain decisions are being made or why this is better for this operator, maybe not so good for that service provider, but better for this service provider, and as a whole it's better for the port, then people understand. If that transparency, if we can generate that transparency, then people are also easier are also easier in accepting the solution that is provided. So that's very important indeed, that it is very clear why certain decisions are being made for the different stakeholders in the port, and that should come from an independent body or an independent software or independent platform that actually provides that based on the set rules that we have all agreed on, and then I believe it can work.
Yeah. And I guess also from the economical perspective, what the Erasmus University is bringing in, I think there is a lot of theory that can be used actually to also see and how do you renegotiate actually your current way of working into a new way of working, where you actually still can divide the costs or split the revenue in one or the other way, so everyone will stay involved. I guess that's also part of the project, right?
It's also a core part of it. We can look at something like game theory, but in the end, it's simple. Like when somebody opens up, when somebody collaborates, they need to see that there's an advantage for them, and we can build mechanisms such that they realize that. And I think this will create a strong momentum in practice if we can demonstrate that.
And
I think what we also should not forget. What we should not forget is that there is technology-wise, there is so much more possible nowadays than 5-10 years ago. So also, we should be careful not to get too much in the discussion of, I don't want to share this data because then this person can see what I'm doing here or what I'm doing there. There's so many different ways of finding that same information as well. Think about satellites. Think about telephone information that is easily available. Think about all the tracking devices that are there. So it is so easy to get that information externally as well. So then it's better to really participate as a stakeholder in this whole port call and actively participate, because otherwise, the information is retrieved somewhere else, which is also something you don't want. You want to be in control, but you want to make sure that you play a role, but that not someone else is taking that information for you or from you. So, and I think that has changed a lot in the last couple of years, where people are starting to realize, I think this is very sensitive information I cannot share, but in fact everybody already knows. And that is with the modern technologies and with AI, machine learning, as Frederik was saying, there's so much more possible nowadays, and that is important that we integrate all that also in this project.
Just to add to that, Patrick and we've also talked to US-based startup that look at camera images that are publicly available. And actually, there's quite something possible that we can learn about port operations and the details that you might not see in the AIS data using camera data. Or we have drones that we could put to better use to also understand the operations better. So there's potential to also make use of new data sources.
I guess there is a lot of data, and I think inferring knowledge from data that already exists, like from history, but also from different sources that are actually already available, phone, AES, but the camera that you say, and mixing and matching that part, I think that will be bring very relevant insights.
Multimodal approaches as a bullet point, be very useful.
Yeah. I think if we would look 5 years into the future, and I think the project is coming to an end. What is it that you want to have achieved in this project, Frederik?
Of course, we had to have a slide with big promises when we convinced the funding agency. There's something that is a pressing challenge, that is shore power. So I hope that we could really help on the way to have shore power operations in place. We're working closely with APMT at that point, but also with the Port of Rotterdam to make that happen. And of course, when we're talking about this federated approach, using machine learning to facilitate better coordination, so come closer to just-in-time. There is this potential that has been described a lot, and we've highlighted it as internationally as much as the Netherlands produce in a year as of emissions that we could save. So maybe come close to a bit of the country that we have at least achieved by then.
Yeah. So there is a gap of 100%. How much will we close it?
Well, I think we could develop a solution for Rotterdam that comes pretty close.
Okay. Oh, that's ambitious. I like that.
And we demonstrated with Teqplay, of course.
I'm in. Count me in.
Yeah.
Patrick, for you?
No, I think it's really a success if we have this platform in place that allows for this port call optimization, that we can really integrate that into the whole voyage planning process of vessels as well. And that's something that what Frederik was saying. There's a huge potential there, and that is also helping the ports to gain their competitive position. So, but it's obviously, Leon, only a success if we are in 5 years' time saying that in your podcast. So now we're really looking forward to what is coming. We have some great partners there, and also and that is I'm sure we can make this work, and we have to. If you want to remain competitive, we have to.
Yeah, and from my perspective, I think I'm also very much with you, Patrick. I think it's also about bringing the people together, creating a platform where people are working together, where trust is created, where it's not only the technology, but it is the relationship between the people that is created, and where there is the willingness to actually step into actively taking a step forward and owning that step. I think that would be, from my perspective, if we could go there, that would be great. And of course, I still do have a lot of technological ambitions on how I can see cool technology work, on how decisions can be made smarter, what needs to be taken into account. But I think, in this world where continuously everything is changing, and you continuously need to adapt, to have the ability to either consciously say, like, okay, this is what we're going for, and we know it's not optimal, but this is what the system can handle, or there is still room for improvement. Having that kind of visibility, that would be for me really a great thing to happen.
I always say, and that's, I think, very important for projects like this. People don't mind change. People mind being changed. And if that is something that you can address with transparency, with clarity, with clear rules, then you also can achieve that change.
Yeah. From your end, Frederik, are there still things that the project is looking for? Are there still gaps that we need to close?
It might be interesting in this conversation to also talk a little bit about AI, because I see very interesting developments there. And it's at the core of the promise of the project as well as the decarbonization, but using AI. And sometimes we see funny developments, like Port Exchange, as one of the project partners, had an April 1 post on Port GPT. And a few people were laughing, including myself, but there was also quite a few people wanting the product immediately. So I think it's very important to understand where are the right use cases for AI and what can we do with AI, what is it actually, and who can do it. Because if we move to agentic AI in the future, it means that it will take decisions for us. And then you can experiment that for yourself in personal usage. Will you feel comfortable with that? Will you feel comfortable with it when you do that as a harbor master for the Port of Rotterdam? I think there are important questions to address, and it's important to work with real experts on these questions who understand the optimization in the background, who understand the machine learning in the background. And hopefully then we can create solutions that actually work based on AI.
Is there, I like this part about AI, thinking about Tesla and have the autonomous car in place and legislation being very hard. So is the project also addressing that area on what needs to be changed in the systems from a legislative point of view?
Yes, we have a governance work package led also by Erasmus University, where we consider the aspects of new forms of collaboration, including AI. And I think it's a very important aspect, of course, for all of us developing these AI solutions to consider aspects like explainability, to build a model where you still follow and still understand how decisions are taken. Because most people don't understand that if they're prompting on ChatGPT, though they might feel that they know what's going on.
They understand ChatGPT, yeah, right. I like that. And in your OptiPort example, Patrick, AI, the role of AI, how do you see agentic AI? How do you see that develop?
Yeah, no. So I think also in line with what Frederik is saying, what we see and what I mentioned earlier is there will be also a lot of focus on this explainable AI. Why have certain decisions been made? So that is definitely something that we are focusing on in our application, and I think that is also something for the port call process. And we are also indeed because OptiPort generates new schedules every time there is a change in some of the parameters in the process. People would like to understand what has changed and what is this new schedule how is this new schedule different from the previous one. So those and that also, if you can generate that in type of information, also helps to accept the change and to accept the schedule that is shown. So yes, there's a lot of focus on that element at the moment. That is really what I said earlier, that about managing change. Then this is so important, the soft skills, so that people, the operators in the process, the stakeholders understand why is this schedule the best schedule for this vessel. And so that's why there is a lot of focus on our end in that as well.
Yeah, cool. I'm really also looking forward. If I look 5 years ahead, I really hope we also have created this collaborative environment, and I think we will not have sorted all problems, because problems will remain. But we have created a new foundation where we actually can reason on a different level on what is happening in the port and how can we do that optimally. Being efficient, reducing the amount of emissions, having maybe a zero emissions port call. I'm really looking forward to that. Maybe some last words. We're looking at the time. We're running out. Is there something you want to add to the discussion, Frederik?
Well, I think it's great what you mentioned. The project is probably facilitating collaboration in an operational way in the port call process, but also collaboration among those people who are working on the solutions. I think that's very important. And then, of course, we are not only this closed circle. I've not mentioned everybody who's involved in the project. That would be a too long list. So we're grateful for everybody who's already on board, but you can also still join us on this project. If you say, this sounds super interesting, you want to be involved, and you're part of the port call process somewhere here in the Netherlands, but maybe also in Belgium or Germany, it's possible to join this project, maybe with a little contribution. We would be very happy. You can also connect to SmartPort, who play an essential role. If you have a slightly different challenge, this would be great to continue.
Okay. Patrick, something for you?
It's a super exciting project. It's a super exciting project with many different, with all the different stakeholders, research institutes, knowledge centers. So, yeah, really glad that we are part, and really looking forward to what is coming. As I said, this is something, a nut you have to crack, because not only in Rotterdam but globally, and if we are successful in that, then there's a great future. So it's going to be fun.
Yeah. Let's start with Rotterdam and then add some more ports to the equation. I think that is my ambition, that we really can push this forward. We can drive change in the maritime.
Already working on it.
Yeah, I would love to thank you both for the interview.
Thank you.
I really enjoyed having this talk, and I think we will continue to have many more of these conversations in this project. Thanks.
Yeah,
thank you.
Let's put it in the agenda in 5 years, Leon. Thank you.
Yeah, I will put it in my agenda. Okay, thanks. Bye.
Thanks. Bye-bye.